Thank you very much, Daniella, for that really stimulating and engaging presentation. I'm sure there's going to be lots there. Is the microphone working?
Just press the red button.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Daniella, for that stimulating and engaging presentation. And I'm sure we're going to be returning to the themes and the points that you've made about the magnitude of paradigm shift that's necessary over the next 3 days. Now we're now moving into the garden conversation format. For those of you that have not attended one of the conferences before, this is when the weather permits, we meet outside, but that's clearly not at the moment. It's the idea that it's a space where people can converse with opinion speakers in a way that might not be possible in a sort of structured question and answer session. So what we'd like is for you to sort of make your contributions, talk with Daniella informally. This can take the form of discussion or a question and answer session, and sort of ask Daniella perhaps to sort of engage with your area, if you engage with hers or whatever. Do we have a microphone for Simon? Or people have to come up here?
I think we'll just ask the question.
Will it be called for the webcast?
Yes.
It will be. Okay, so in that case, the floor is open. Please.
Hi, Jennifer, model, the name of my university at the moment. Hi, Daniella, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Debbie.
I was just going to pick up on something that you said right at the beginning of the talk, which is about the rankings and the time to higher education. Because, of course, it's one of those fascinating debates that we have quite a lot. And I'm really interested to hear how you feel about rankings generally, but also sustainability rankings. So do you see these as a contributor or a disruptor? You know, are they helping or are they sustainability?
Yeah, good question. I must declare that I am very partial to evaluation, as you might know. I'm very partial to assessments because I think they keep us in check, they remind us where we are and so on. So in principle, I have no objection to having these types of rankings or assessments. The Times Higher in particular, I have real problems with, and I have been talking to them for years about it. If we're going to do it, we've got to do it right. But the indicators we have at the moment, the assessment rankings that we have, don't actually go to the core of changes that we're seeking. They are very superficial in their assessments. They are looking for that content and mapping, and maybe perhaps identifying 1 or 2 really interesting examples to share. But they don't go to the core of, are we transitioning? They are looking for sample projects. They are looking for broader agendas that are already being delivered by universities and have been for centuries. So it's sort of recognizing things universities have been doing for a long time, which is having an excellent program on the side, but not embedding it at the core of the institution. So for me, the rankings, those particular rankings mean nothing. There are other rankings, like I used to be very partial to the Greenleaf rankings in the UK. I don't know what they're like now because I haven't been following them so recently. But they served as a trigger for higher education leaders to say, I hadn't really taken note of how important this agenda is, and sustainability teams having a tool to persuade governing bodies for changing this agenda. So I have seen that happen for real, and I see some doing those types of self-assessments, rankings that you submit evidence and you yourself score, and then there's a verifier and validate some of the attainment or some of the progress that you've made. But you need to be scoring the right thing, and that's where it becomes tricky.
Yes, one of the questions that I have is that in the kind of cases that you work through, where do you most commonly see the disruption coming from? Does it come from student bodies, faculties, outside, as thinking through strategy, what have you seen that has been the most productive pathway?
Another good question. It varies depending on institutions, contexts, and time. So in some places, they have been, like Harvard, for example, you see the power of the voice of the students has been quite significant in being the tipping point for something that's been boiling for many years. There isn't a single point, I think, in my view, of disruption. I think there has to be a change in the social context, and one particular voice in particular might have more power than another, but there has to be a more widespread change across the institution. So timing is important. You may have student protests for 20 years and have no impact, but if the social context is changing and you have a pushy student body, then it can be that tipping point. I've seen also vice chancellors, leadership teams that have come with some social commitments and realizing that the social commitment is so tied to the environmental responsibility that they have adopted sustainability as a core driving principle in institutions. I have seen research work that has been quite groundbreaking, that has also tipped the scales towards embracing sustainability institution-wide. I have seen examples of external partnerships with corporates that are quite influential in the locality, driving change. So it can come from a variety of sources. It's just there has to be enough of the social context for it to be embraced deeply in the institution.
Yeah, Marvin Payne from Wazir University in California, United States. I appreciate the compelling thoughts you put out. I noticed you alluded a bit to the finances and the business side. I mean, part of my experience has been that, you know, there are some innovative institutions that you mentioned, but in general, you have governing bodies and finance people that are focused heavily on the status quo, specifically protecting the endowment of the institution, right? And so if you think about it, protecting the endowment and whoever controls that endowment is a huge either impediment or can be a stimulator of disruption. But in general, I would say we're still in the state where an institution wants to protect the status quo rather than
that's right. I don't think it's driven by those teams.
No, but you have to deal with it.
Oh, absolutely. But it is happening. Those changes are happening. I mean, I gave those examples of 2021 being the most fundamental year where that transition is beginning to happen. And there's a number of things that, going back to your question, that are driving that change, not just the student bodies and the social expectations. Of course, countries are committing to climate targets now. And universities are critical in delivering climate targets physically, as are schools actually. So the education system itself has to transition to become climate neutral or climate positive, depending on your degree of ambition. And the expectations are on leadership teams to deliver that, not just walk the talk of what they're preaching in their classrooms, which is, for me, a compelling narrative in the first place. But there is now an expectation from government agencies, from funding sources, for that transition to happen. So I think there is a convergence of reasons now, and we will see the next 5 years have been quite critical in changing some of the business models, in my view, of higher education.
Thank you.
Thanks. The question?
Just a follow-up on this conversation is, you know, part of the question I keep asking myself is how far down the line do you go? You know, to a certain degree, we're in university that is always a material infrastructure to a certain degree, you know, and what does it mean for the future of the university as well as a research institute when there could be corporate or financial reasons to actually undermine what the infrastructure of that is, as delivering things that I'm thinking, you know, undermining humanities and social sciences and yes, and kind of internationality, all these things that we work of building an inclusive university, could there be a countervailing tendency
Yeah.
that
I
rationalizes it in a negative sense?
I don't see it like that, but not everybody shares my perspective. I'm a great supporter of international education, and I do think that it's really important that students do travel, and that there is a way of obviously traveling, looking at ways of travel that reduces carbon footprints or compensates for them, but not substitute travel. Travel is absolutely really critical for students and staff. Really important, because if the core of all of this is to change the way we relate to people and planet, you're not going to do that by staying in your own little box of the way that you've been socialized, the social influences that you experience. You have to question yourself, you have to question the way you live, the way you learn, and that requires challenging your cultural frames. That requires travel. So, this agenda is not about completely reducing, any type of footprint. It's about making smart decisions and looking at where you can have the greatest impact. So food for me is much more critically important than internationalization in that sense. Of course, there are ways in which, you can reduce the international travel footprint by being smart. Things like interviews with staff and students who don't do travel, you can do that online. There are experiential aspects that must be retained in a university. With regards to the building and infrastructure, that will be a very slow process, of course. We have to transition, the harder core of higher education, but it needs to be done. It absolutely needs to be done in the same way that the countries are needing to transition their energy sources away from coal. Very hard decisions about how you move away from coal to sustainable forms of energy. It's very hard decisions, but it's no longer acceptable to be doing certain things. It is no longer acceptable. But the death of coal at COP26 was pretty explicit. No country can really afford to actually invest in coal, other than, of course, we see Australia and China. And even then, we're at COP26, we're committing to reduce their transition away from coal.
I believe the Australians.
Yeah, being half Australian myself. So, it's the same with universities. There'll be lots of difficult decisions, there'll be transitions, but there is an inevitable path away from buildings that are high energy consumption and are not flexible. Buildings like this. You cannot move the chairs, you cannot change them around. Where's the energy source that's sustaining the heating needs of this building, or the energy needs? All the toilets need to be run on recycled water. We are designing schools and universities now that are carbon neutral. Never mind carbon positive. It is happening. It is a reality. It does not cost more, I can tell you, because under my budget, I'm managing some aspects of this. And it is not more expensive. It just requires planning. It requires transition. And yeah, it is a possibility, and I think it's manageable. Por supuesto.
Bueno, tú nos estabas comentando de esa importancia de hacer los cambios en las decisiones alimentarias.
Sí.
Justamente es mi tema y estoy completamente de acuerdo, pero quería saber cómo fue esa transición en términos, no solo de las decisiones que se toman respecto a qué vamos a comer, sino a, como por ejemplo, lo que estamos hablando, está todo interconectado. Entonces,
sí.
Si yo estoy produciendo una comida que no es saludable, que definitivamente está teniendo impacto en el ambiente porque usa agroquímicos, por ejemplo.
Sí.
Entonces, bueno, cambiamos a vegetales, pero estamos consumiendo vegetales que
Sí.
están producidos con agroquímicos. ¿Hubo algún tipo de contacto con el gobierno para hacer también cambios en esa producción alimentaria? ¿O solamente se llegó hasta el cambio?
Buena pregunta. Bueno, pues, por ejemplo, la universidad donde estaba yo antes, en Inglaterra, tomamos esa decisión de cambiar el catering de la universidad. Y fue una decisión, se tomó una decisión a nivel muy alto para cometerse a esta agenda, ¿no? Pero cuando fuimos a implementarlo fue súper complicado. Porque entonces, ¿qué tuvimos que hacer? Nos dimos cuenta que, por ejemplo, tanto, no solo la calidad de la comida, sino que algunos de los productos se producían a 50 millas donde trabajábamos, pero iban a una red de distribución hacia Londres, y de Londres volvían a la universidad de Gloucestershire donde estaba trabajando, y era 50 millas, es que era ridículo la red de distribución, porque no era solo salud, y la calidad de los productos, sino también el eso de carbono. Bueno, pues se tardó, creo que eran 2 años, en conversaciones con no solo el staff, las personas que llevaban el catering, sino con los supply chains, los proveedores. Muchísimo hablar con los proveedores. Ellos también estaban interesados en esta gente porque sabía que iban a haber más y más universidades que le iban a pedir, pero no sabían dónde empezar. Entonces ellos tenían que hablar con los diferentes aspectos de los supply chains. Todos lo que producían la comida, lo que transportaban la comida, los distribuidores, todos que procuraran la comida que se producía en el campus, ¿no? Tenían que mapearlo, mirar las opciones y enganchar conversaciones para poder sostener estos cambios. Porque también tenían que mirar el aspecto del precio, no podíamos subir el precio mucho. Tenía que ver opciones que eran reales y creativas para los estudiantes poder costearse, comer en la universidad. Y entonces fueron complicadas, pero eran posibles. Y hasta ahora siguen mejorando año en año en año. Entonces no ocurre todo de pronto, sino vas introduciendo innovaciones, cambios poquito a poco. Y de que tengas una política que sea aceptada como en los siguientes 3 o 4 años queremos hacer esto. Y empiezas poquito a poco y llegan. Esos cambios fueron reconocidos por otros campuses, otras universidades y se fueron reproduciendo, ¿no? Y ahora el gobierno británico está haciendo una estrategia nacional de educación y cambio climático, intentando cambiar la oferta a nivel educativo y aunque no se ha aceptado todavía, son discusiones, preguntas que se están haciendo para intentar de cambiar esa base. Aunque no ha venido del gobierno, pero se está promoviendo por esos círculos. ¿De qué te estaba?
Hay una pregunta en el chat sobre esto. La ruptura, disrupción mencionada, ¿es fortaleza para una cultura sostenible? Sí, la ruptura mencionada es fortaleza para una cultura sostenible. La ruptura mencionada. La disrupción, sí, disruption.
Vale. No sé si he comprendido la pregunta. Si la cultura disruptiva es la base para un mundo más sostenible, ¿es esta pregunta?
Que si la ruptura, la disruption de la que ha hablado, es fortaleza para crear una cultura sostenible.
No sé si sería fortaleza, sino eso mínimo, ¿no? Eso mínimo, la disrupción está ahí, no la podemos cambiar, está ahí, está emergente, va a causar muchos problemas, lo queramos o no lo queramos. Los puedes ver con las gafas de, eso es difícil y a ver cómo movemos las cosas, o podemos verlos con las gafas, esto es una oportunidad. Tenemos voces que intentan de motivar cambios, tenemos a una población estudiantil que ve que esto es importante, que reconocen que el mundo que ellos quieren en el futuro es muy distinto al que vivimos ahora. ¿Cómo creamos ese mundo? Son oportunidades. Pues sí, para mí, yo lo veo como algo que tenemos que reconocer que está ocurriendo. No podemos, en inglés, turn a blind eye. Está ahí, está ocurriendo. Y hay que abrir los ojos, buscar las oportunidades y ver cómo podemos darle la vuelta a una cosa que es potencialmente muy conflictiva, a algo que es una oportunidad para llevar la educación, los cambios educativos y la sostenibilidad para adelante. Porque si evitamos la disrupción, terminamos con una versión de sostenibilidad que es muy superficial. Terminamos con el tema de la lechuga del carnicero, ¿no? Lo ponemos aquí, pero no tocamos el tema más significante. Y por eso es importante no atacar, sino confrontar el aspecto de la disrupción.
That's good, thanks, Tatiana. And it's very good to see engagement from those of you who are attending digitally and remotely. So thank you very much for that participation. Any other contributions? We're running close, I think, yeah. So we're gonna, before we thank Daniella again for her contribution, we're gonna be moving soon to the talking circle format. For those of you that have not been to one of these before, the talking circles is a way of introducing yourself, of meeting old friends, making new ones, finding shared areas of interest that you can talk about during the conference and pursue when the conference is finished. So I'd just like to once again thank Daniella for a very, very interesting, informative, and stimulating start to the conference, and thanks for the engagement from the floor and remotely with what Daniella has offered us this morning. So Daniella, thank you very much.
Solo comentar que ahora tenemos en inglés las mesas redondas en aulas B1, B4 y en español. Aquí continuará con el coloquio sobre acción para la sostenibilización en la Universidad de Granada. Así que pueden elegir a la mesa redonda en inglés o quedarse aquí y ver el coloquio en castellano.
So the English speaking delegates, I will walk us to where the rooms are, and you will know